Hey guys, and welcome to /X Games. In this tutorial, I'm going to be doing a very bare bones basic introduction to what GameMaker is and how you can start your very first project. If you've never touched programming or game design in any way, this is the tutorial for you. And I'm not going to start this off in some boring manner of explaining what all the buttons and knobs do. Instead, we are going to jump straight into what it is you will be creating. And then from there, I'm going to show you piece by piece how we build it up from absolute scratch. So before we begin, let's set the scene. The year is 2162. You awake one morning pleasantly, as you have been for the past 10 years of your life. Everything is still and calm. A faint ticking can be heard from the nearby mechanical timepiece abreast your bedside table. You turn airily to stare out the portside window of your quarters, expecting to gaze once more upon the nothingness that is space, as you have done every morning so far, hoping maybe to see a star slightly brighter than the rest, or distant space dust in some sort of pattern or picture. You imagine a feeling akin to what Earthfolk feel when they stare up at the clouds. Or at least that's what the stories tell you. However, on this day, the universe has different plans. Instead of seeing this nothingness of space or space dust pictures, you come across this. Now I know this is crazy, I mean really. Dancing bananas on comets floating through space. I haven't entirely lost my mind this time. This is just an example I threw together that best describes some of the great features and quick things we can do with GameMaker. So you see, we have different objects here. We've got comets, we've got dancing bananas. The comets aren't animating, the dancing banana people are. And we've got the scrolling background, we've got this window that we're looking through, and it's got a sort of bluish, windowish transparency going on there. And these little bananas are going in and out of the game room, and they're coming in from the opposite side, so they are effectively wrapping around the room. So in this tutorial, this very, very basic tutorial, I'm going to show you how to do this relatively easily. So let's jump right straight into an empty project, and let's start explaining stuff. Here we go. Now when you start GameMaker up, this is the screen you will be presented with. On the left, you see this resource tree. You've got sprites, sounds, backgrounds, paths, scripts, shaders, fonts, timelines, objects, room, included files, extensions, and constants. And on the right here, this piece of open space, this is into where your resources will be expanded and manipulated at will. So now you're probably wondering, well, how do you start it off? Where to begin? What are the bare minimum requirements for creating the first game? Well, basically, we are going to need to create a room, we are going to need to create objects to put inside that room, and we're going to need to assign sprites, which are little images, to those objects so that they can be represented on the screen. So before we jump into the creation of our resources, I'd just like to fill you in on some standard naming conventions. So basically, when you create a resource, you got to think of how you're going to affix the resource type to the resource name. Now, I like to always prefix it, so when I create a sprite, I put SPR and then an underscore and then the sprite name, like player or object or whatever. SPR something. You can also suffix it at the end, but when the resource tree gets quite long, it's going to be hard for you to see the suffixes. So I recommend you prefix. Creating a path, enemy, background, main menu or something, have few letters followed by an underscore, and these are the ones that I like to use. They might not exactly be, standard, other ones that some people use, but they're very descriptive. SPR for sprite, we've got sound, we've got backgrounds, path, script, font, timelines, object, and room. These are the prefixes I use in all of my tutorials, and you can't go wrong with them. I've never gone wrong with them. It's always easy to see what resource I'm using just by the first few letters at the beginning. So now that you understand that, we're going to jump right into the first few items and resources that we are going to create. So to start this off, I'm going to create a game room. Now if you're wondering what a game room is, basically a game room can be the levels, the scenes, the situations, or the instances of your greater game world. These game rooms, you can have many of them, can be switched, traversed, or changed at will in any order you wish, in order for you to tell your story. Think of them as pages in an epic novel that is your game. What you fill those pages with is entirely up to you. So first we're going to right click on our room, we're going to click create room, just like that. It's going to pop up with something like this. Alright, we're going to expand it here. Let's have a look firstly at the settings tab. Settings tab is going to have a room. So just like the prefixes I showed you before, we're going to put RM for room, and here I'm going to say game world. It's always nice to know that this is the game world. We've got our height and width. Here I'm going to do a 1280 by 720. Notice how it expands this grayness. At the top we can select and deselect a grid pattern, or even a diagonal grid pattern, whichever one you wish. You've got your snap here, that's when you put objects down, they snap to this grid, but we'll worry about that much later. Now we're going to head over to one important item, room speed. That's this over here. That's this variable. At present, it's set to 30. Now, this variable holds the running speed of the current room. Note that this is not the frames per second. Rather, this is the number of game steps that GameMaker will try and maintain every second your game is running. 60 frames per second will still run 30 steps per second. That is a very key element to understand. All the objects in your game have a cycle. They start with a create event, they go through a step event, and they end with other events. But you must note that 30, this over here, means that it's going to be cycling through certain events 30 times a second. So 30 steps per second is the default. I usually use 30 just because it has worked. I've had no reason to increase it anymore. But if you want to set this as 60, it means your game's going to be running at 60 steps per second. So if you are getting 60 frames per second, that's great, go for it. But if your game drops below 60 frames per second and you tell it to do more, 60 or more steps per second, you're going to see notable lag and irregular gameplay. So I suggest you choose a speed that you can maintain with regard to how much memory and how demanding your game is. So speed at 30, that's great, right over there. Persistence, this little button over here, it's really more of an advanced feature, but basically it means rooms that are persistent will remember all instances manipulated within the game room. So if you leave and come back, how those objects have moved before you left, you'll come back to the exact location that they were left. It's pretty simple. Now, just as objects have a series of events, a room has one such event called the creation code. Basically, anything placed inside the creation code will execute as the room is created. But we're not going to worry about that right now, so we can exit that, and we don't need to save it. Instance order. When you place instances in this game room, it'll pop them up here. Some instances require that other instances be created first if they reference variables. So here you'll be able to list all the current instances in existence in your room, and you can bump them up and down, and it'll give you some IDs and whatnot. Don't have to worry about this right now really, but it's there if you do need it. So now that we've got a room, we need to somehow make this room awesome. And to do that, we're going to start with a background. Click on Backgrounds tab. Now here you can draw a background color, you can do this kind of stuff, but in our tutorial, we are going to draw a star field right at the back. So we're not going to draw a background color. We're going to make sure it's on background 0. We're going to say it's visible when the room starts, and here we're going to choose an image. But before we can do that, we need to import a background into the resources so that we can use it here. So for now, we're going to close the game world. We're going to go to Backgrounds. We're going to right click on Backgrounds and say Create. Now, if you're wondering what a background is, basically backgrounds are split into two major parts. We've got our large static images, which take up a lot of space if they are huge. Then you've got tile sets. Tile sets are larger images that are composed of small images, and you can set just exactly how big these small images are, and you can place these smaller images in your game room on top of objects and create beautiful levels and graphical effects that are very efficient because they use very little memory. So in this tutorial, I'm going to use a static, somewhat large image, and then in our game room, we're going to make it scroll to make it look infinite. So firstly, our name. Background, naming conventions. I like to go for BKG, for background. Kind of works. Underscore, what are we going to call this? Starfield. Very descriptive. We're going to click load, locate our starfield right over here. It's a JPEG, so backgrounds can be a multitude of formats. In this case, it's a JPEG. Say OK. There it is, right over there. That's our starfield. We don't want it to tile horizontally or vertically because our room is the same dimensions right over there. And if we had to use this as a tile set, notice how it breaks it into all these blocks. But we're not going to worry about that right now. So just as it is, everything is default as is. We're not tiling. And we say OK. That's our first resource. Notice there it is over there. If we double click on it, it brings it to the front. Pretty interesting. Going back to our room over here, now we can go to backgrounds. We can go down to this here where it says no background. Click that, change it to Starfield, and bam, there we go. We've got our Starfield. Little click to move that around. Check that out. Pretty cool. Pretty cool indeed. Now, one piece of advice, if you're going to be using a background image, deselect draw background color. This will save you some memory and it'll make your game efficient because we're not needing to draw a whole room size of a color just like that. So that's one tip right over there. We don't want it to stretch, it's the right size. Now here you've got horizontal speed and vertical speed. These two items make the background scroll. Basically they're used to create a movement, and simulate an infinite world within a very small space. So if you have a positive number, we're going to scroll right or down, and if you have a negative number, you're going to go left or up, right, like that. So in this case, we want it to scroll from left to right, so we can have a positive number right over here. I'm going to go for a 2. So the horizontal speed is going to be 2, it's going to be moving to the right 2. It's going to look really, really cool. If you had to fill this value in 2, then it'll start moving diagonally. I suggest that you have a background image that tiles very well, so that when it scrolls into the next part, you won't have a seam, so it's a seamless kind of image right over there. So now we've got that set up, we can just accept that so far. So we've got our background, we've got our room that we are using. Next, we're going to take a look at sprites. So a sprite is generally the visual representation of your objects within the game world that you're creating. So that's what the player sees. When he sees objects, he's actually really just seeing the object drawing a sprite, and that's what they manipulate. They manipulate the object by seeing the sprite. So a sprite can be made up of single images, it can be made up of a sequence of images to form like a looping animation of some kind. So to do this, we're going to create 2 sprites to start off with. One is going to be a static comet. The other one is going to be a dancing banana man. And you know what? I'm going to make a third one too, which is going to be that window, that port window. So to create a static image, right over here, we're going to first call this something, sprite comet. We're going to say load. We're going to find it. Comet over there. Notice you've got all these features here. You've got edit. That'll bring up a sprite editor. You've got some collision. You don't have to worry about collision. It's basically when sprites collide. It's used to detect in which case they're colliding. To start this off, I'm going to remove all this transparent space just so that we can save some memory and make sure our program is as efficient as it possibly can be. So we're going to click on edit. It'll bring up this sort of window right over here. And here we have a preview. If you had a multiple number of sprites, as I'll show you in the Dancing Banana Man, this will jump around. We don't need that right now. If we wanted to edit this, we double click on it. It'll bring up the image editor. So this image editor has come a long way. It's rather useful. I mean, you can draw on it, you can do all kinds of things. You can select things, paint whole areas, and whatnot. So for now, we just want to crop this image. So here we go into transform. Scroll down here, all these other little features we can all use. I urge you to jump into this image editor and just fiddle around as much as you can. Check all these effects out. They're quite interesting. So now we're going to crop. We want a border of 0. Click OK. Check it gets all the white space, gets rid of all that. Click OK. That's as good as we really need. OK again. Center this. Notice that's the center point. So when we're dragging this around the room, we'll take hold of the centerpiece. Also, when we manipulate this sprite, which will in that case be an object instance, it'll rotate and flip and do all that stuff depending on where this origin is. So if this origin is over there, this is going to be the center point, right? If it's in the middle, where the middle of the sprite, as I've clicked here in center, that's the dead center, right over there. So we've got the comment. We're going to click OK. As the other static sprite I'm going to add is sprite window. That's just going to be our portal into the space world, right over there. It's quite a big one. Okay. Just going to center that. That is as is. It's all good. Now, we're going to add a series of images from a sprite strip, and I'm going to show you how to divide them up to create your animation. So this is going to be sprite man, load, find it, here it is. See, it's a strip. Click OK. Now notice that here we have a whole lot of little images, but we want them to be played one on top of each other to create a sort of animation. So instead of loading it in that way, you're going to go edit. I'm going to delete this. I'm going to say file, create from strip, locate that same strip over there, click open. Now it's going to bring you this. As before, it loads the entire strip. It's going to ask you how many images per row, height, all these different things we need to input so that it can select exactly which sprite we need to cut out. So number of images, we're going to say 8. Images per row, 8, right over there. Notice this, it's created little blocks, very small over there, 8 of them. Image width, in this case we're going to say 94. Our height is going to be, let's try 94 also, that's too small, 120, 130. 130 is fine. Then we've got our horizontal cell offset. I'm going to set this to 0. If you put a 1, it's going to skip the first one. If you put a 2, etc., it's going to keep skipping the first few images. So we're going to leave that 0, both 0. Pixel offset. My pixel offset when I created this was 3 and 3. So it's like 3 off the top, 3 off the bottom, and then your horizontal separation. This is your separation between the different sprites in the sprite strip, and in this case this was also 3. Now if we look here carefully, we can see that we've got every single image. They're all in line quite nicely. And if we click OK, it'll put it into 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 sub-images. Check that out. It's taken the strip and just divided it up. Now if I click Show Preview, check, it's going to dance around. Pretty cool, huh? And here again, we've got the speed. This is to simulate what it'll look like. So it'll look like that at 30 steps a second. We can change it to like 2. Notice he dances very slow, 2 steps a second. Check that out. Pretty cool, huh? So 100. Really fast. Really, really fast. So we'll leave that as 30. This is just a preview. So we can click that away. Say OK. Now we've got create out. We've got a man. Notice here it says number of sub-images, and we can click through them just like that. And they're pretty good. So we center that as is. We've got our sprite man. Now, because we're going to make this man rotate around the comet, I'll put this right over there. Changing the origin to on the comet. Just like that. Pretty cool. So now we've gone through the sprites. We can click OK. We have our 3 sprites, the comet, the man, and the window. So we can pretty much move straight into what an object is. So right down here. So an object is a resource from which all object instances are created. It handles the interactivity from the user. The behaviors of an object are defined in the events and actions that it contains. These events can be configured through drag and drop. If you're not a code person, you can do drag and drop. It's fairly easy. But if you do like coding, like me, then you can slap in the whole GML scripting language. It's quite fun and interesting to learn. I do recommend you attempt it. So to create an object, we just right-click on object, say create. It'll open up something like this. Now, a big thing to note about objects is that these objects are not directly created and placed in rooms. Instead, instances or occurrences of these objects are created. So you can have one object and as many instances as you want. So think of an object as a template of an instance. You can have as many instances as you want of this object, and each instance does not affect each other unless you specifically tell them to. So referring back to the naming convention, to create an object, we're going to just have use an obj for object. And to start this off, we're going to create object man. And to give it a sprite, we click down here at sprites. We go down to sprite man. Notice you have to have this resource already included in your resource tree before you can use it. Just as when we added a background to the game world, we had to have the background in our resources, backgrounds resources. So going down here, we've got visible. Can the player see the object? Well, yeah, we want the player to see it, so it's visible. Is it solid? Now, to do some collisions, you go for solid. If it's like a wall, click solid. It's just easier to handle collisions. Persistent. If I work with this object over here, and I move to the next room and I come back, will this object be in the same situation as it was before? So if you want that, enable persistence. Physics, we're not going to worry about physics right now. Depth. This is in which order it is drawn relative to the top of the screen and the infinite bottom of the screen. So to the top of the screen is a very negative number. So negative 1000 would be drawn on top of negative 999, for example. A positive number, like 1000, will be drawn right at the bottom. A number of 0 is the default. So if you have a whole lot of objects with 0, if one is created after another, the second object will be drawn on top of the one created before it. So if you want specific objects to always be drawn above other objects, give it a very large negative number. If you want an object to be drawn as far below as possible, give it a very large positive number. It's as simple as that. So in this case, I'm just going to set it to default. Parents, this is all about inheritance, where you can create one master object that acts as the parent to smaller objects. If you want to check out what inheritance is, I've got a great tutorial on that. It's in the banner. Click that, maybe at a later stage. That'll explain what inheritance is, but right now we don't need that. Mask, this is collision masks. We don't need that. Exactly. So, here we have the events and the actions. Every step of your game, certain events happen or are detected, and those events are acted upon by actions. So they're basically discrete moments in the game loop where things are made to happen based on what you have programmed them. So GameMaker works in a cycle of these events. We start with a create event, moving on to the step event, and so on. And then after all required events have been run, then the step event takes over. From the moment a room is started to the moment it is finished, there is a game loop running where every step, remember a step is a moment in the game time governed by that room speed variable we checked out, a series of events are run. You can choose to place either code in here, if you had to go control and drag over some code, or you can place all these drag and drop widgets. So we've got move, all these from mains, control, score, extra draw. Very helpful, very helpful. I'll be using drag and drop in this tutorial as it is a beginner. Very beginner's move. So once an event has been added, then we can add actions to that event. See, that's why earlier when I dragged this, it said I can't because I need an event first. So we're going to go over the types of events. If we click add event, you'll notice this little box pops up. Create, destroy, alarm, blah, 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 keep pressing it. So a create event. This happens only once when this object or an instance of this object is created. Then it runs through some create code. That's what the create does. The destroy event, this is the very last event that runs if we tell this object to destroy itself at some period in time. If it collides with something, it's destroyed because we shoot it with a laser. So we tell it to self-destruct. Then we can use this destroy event to increment our score. We can make a nice explosion effect. An alarm is basically a special event that does nothing until it has previously been set. So if you want something to happen a few seconds in the future, after a certain condition is met, you can just set up an alarm, tell it to run a certain piece of code 5 seconds later, and it'll do that. So it starts and it counts down, gets to 0, and it does your piece of code. It's pretty cool. Step event is the loop that runs constantly with all events being checked and triggered as necessary during runtime. The step event is an event that is checked every step of the game while this instance exists. Now if you click on step, you'll notice there's all kinds of different steps. There's the begin, the end step, and the normal default step. Now, as a beginner, you can just use this step. If you wanted things to happen before other things, you can do the very begin step. So when the step loop is started, it'll start with the begin step, it goes to the step, then it ends with the end step. So depending on what order you want things to run, you can generally just put in a step and then code at the top will be executed before code at the bottom, that sort of thing. Then we're going to head over collisions. This is going to create a collision event whenever one object collides with another, and when you click it's going to list all your objects, and then you just say this object collides with what object, do something, and then you can add an action to handle that collision. Keyboard, this detects keyboard presses and releases and all kinds of keyboard interaction. And you've got your mouse, exactly the same. Then you've got other, which is handles a few other special events. You've got outside, insect boundary of the game world. You've got some views, your start, your game end, room start, game end. You can look through all these, and then you can also define your own events right over there. Then we've got draw. So the default event handles assigning sprites to objects and any modifications made throughout other events. Custom draw events override the default draw. So basically, there's always a default draw event running, even though it's not here. It's always there, drawing whatever sprite you've chosen. But if I select a draw event and add some code, it's going to override that default one, and it's going to draw whatever I want instead over there. Now, it also has a few different draw events. Begin and end. We've got our draw GUI. This is our graphic user interface, which has the highest depth, highest negative number depth right over there. It's pretty cool. But basically, you can use these two standard ones right over here. If you want to have an invisible object, so visibility is unticked, this object is invisible, make sure you don't place any essential operation code in the draw event, because basically when you uncheck visible, it just skips the draw event and the default draw entirely, so that your object still moves around, it does things, but it's invisible, somewhat like a transparent ghost. Yes, exactly like a transparent ghost. It's still there, it still gives you the chills, but you can't see it, right? So if in here you're telling this object to move, it's not going to be able to do that if it's not visible because it's skipping this event. So make sure this draw event only has things that it needs to draw. Basically, leave the drawing to the draw event. Anything else, put in any other event other than the draw event. And over here we've got key press, key release, somewhat similar to keyboard. Asynchronous, this handles events from, externally to GameMaker. So all that kind of stuff. If you want to know one specifically, you can check out my custom high scores table. I use an asynchronous dialogue event, but that is pretty advanced, so you don't really have to worry about that right now. But if you're interested, somewhat curious, you can go check that out. It's in the banner. So for now, we are going to start off with a create right over there. Okay. Now, do note that the order in which you place actions in this action panel is the order in which they are executed. So in this tutorial, I'm just going to be using drag and drop out of these side widgets, and we are going to make this man spin around, go zoom off in a random direction. He's going to wrap the screen, so if he goes out the bottom, he's going to come out into the middle, all that kind of cool stuff. So to start this off, we've got our create. we're going to drag in some variables right over here. We're going to go to control, variable, var. This one says set variable. Drag that in. So the variable we're going to set is image speed, and we are going to set it to 0.2. Now this is the speed in which the image switches from one image to the next, right? Like that. Click OK. Drag in another variable. This one we are going to set, we're going to create a variable called angle, and we are going to give it a random, number between, I'm saying -5 and 5, so it'll either rotate left or right. So here we're going to say irandom range. I stands for integer, so we just want to get whole numbers. Our range is going to require two arguments, one being -5 and the other one being 5. It's pretty simple. So it's going to give a value between -5 and 5, including those two, to this variable angle. And we're going to use that later to make it rotate. So once that's done, grab in another piece of code. This one we're going to be calling direction. This is the direction in which the object is moving, or facing. And in this case, we're going to set an irandom, maybe not random, yeah, an irandom. And it's just going to be 360 degrees, like that. Irandom, 360 degrees. So it can be between 0 and 360. So it's going to be pointing in a random direction. Now, in order to make it move in that direction, you have to indicate a speed, like that. And we want it to move at a random speed. Notice I'm using a lot of random stuff here. Let's just to spice it up a bit. Random speed between 1 and 3. I think that's good. Notice we're using commas, not full stops over here to separate arguments. And saying OK. Then we're going to drag in more code. We need to manipulate the size of the sprite that is assigned to this object. So we're going to say image x scale. So this is the scale along the x-axis from left to right. So that's the horizontal scale. Value here we're going to set is going to be, again, random range. I really love randoms. And it's not irandom, so it could be a floating point, a decimal, We're going to set it to 0.2, which is 20% of its big size, as we've said here. Between 0.2 and I'm going to say 1.5, so 150% of its size. So 20% to 150% of its size, that's what's going to be floating around. So small scaled images will look like they're far away, big ones will look like they're close, that kind of thing. Have a sort of an illusion of distance. I'm going to say OK. Then when we set the x scale, we need to make sure we set the y scale too, otherwise it's going to stretch things. Image y scale, we're just going to set that to image x scale, so that the scale is constrained. So when we increase the x scale or decrease the x scale, we've done so to the y scale also. So that's all done. So now that we've set up the create, it's going to set up its image speed, the speed in which it goes through its images, sub-images. At 0.2, it's going to set up a random angle equals irandom range, between -5 and 5 degrees. We are setting a direction, a random 360 degree direction, so anywhere it can move, it's going to choose a direction to move. We're setting its speed to an integer between 1 and 3. Now, once we've set the speed, it's going to be moving in that direction. As soon as it gets to here, it's already started moving. Then it's going to do its x and y scale, make sure that we've got some objects that are bigger than others. And now that that's done, that's on the create. So this only happens once. We're going to go over here, back to our events. We're going to add event, create a step, just a normal step. So this is going to be happening, those 30, remember? The room speed was 30. So this is going to be executing 30 times a second. So here we are going to do some things. We're going to drag in a variable. We're going to say set this variable. What do we want to set? Image angle. Now, image angle is the angle in which the image is facing, right? So if we change this, it's going to be slightly to the left, slightly to the right, depending on if it's a negative or positive value. But basically, we're going to say image angle equals image angle plus that angle variable that we created in the create. So it's going to take what our image angle is now, and it's going to set it to what it is now plus that extra bit of angle, and it's going to be doing that every step of the game. See? And it's always going to be updating image angle. So the next time it runs this step, runs a step for the second time, this image angle is now going to be equal to that, and it's going to add the angle, etc., etc. So it's going to consistently be moving left or right depending on whatever we've set up in this angle. Alright, so now that that's done, we need to make sure that our objects don't float off the screen into oblivion and we never ever see them again, because they're still using memory. They're still floating off screen slowly but surely towards the infinity. So we need to make sure that they either destroy themselves or they are warped to a different side. So if we go to move, we can use a screen wrap. We can drag that in, or I think we've got delete somewhere around here. Main one, we can tell it to delete itself if we want, but we don't want to delete it. We want it to screen wrap. So go to move, we'll grab wrap. Now, because the instance is going to be moving in random direction, I'm going to say wrap in both directions, just like that. Easy. Okay, so that is pretty much all set. When it gets to the edge of the screen, see, wrap in both directions when outside, it's going to teleport to the other side of the screen. So once that's done, we're going to check out some of these other buttons. Show information, blam, you click that. It is going to bring up, there it is, a little dialog, and it's going to have everything you've set up. Check that out. So here you've got the information about object, it's got all these different buttons that we've selected, and it's also got, check, this is all our code. So that's on our create, and further down it'll have the step event. So basically that's what the show information does. And you can also print that out if you wish. We're going to click OK. Notice that changed to object man. I'm going to create another object called object comet. We're going to give it that comet. Now you can take an object like this and we can copy its code to another object. So we can create another create event just like that. And we can copy all this code. Hold shift, click, Control C to copy. Drag into this action over here. Control V to paste. Now, certain things that this object doesn't need, it only has one sub-image, so it doesn't need this image speed. You can delete that. Otherwise, everything else is pretty much exactly the same. We can do the same with the step. Copy both of those. Go back to the comet. Add event, step, step, paste. See? Exactly right. So once those are done, I'm going to set their depth as, depending on in which order they are created, they will be put on top or below each other. Click OK, click OK. Now another thing is I'm going to create that object that's going to draw this window over there, right on top of everything. So to do that, I'm going to create the name object window. Going to give it no sprite for now. I'm going to add an event. In this case, I'm going to add a draw GUI. So this is right on top. Nothing else will be drawn any higher than this window right at the top. So we're going to go to draw at the bottom. Here at the top it says draw sprite, drag that in. Which sprite do we want to draw? Here we can select sprite window. X and Y, room width. Check this out. This is going to grab the room width in pixels of the current room that this object is running in. So in this case it'll be of the game world. And here we're going to divide it by 2 to get the center on the horizontal plane. And here we're going to change this to width to height. It's going to get the center of the y-axis. And sub-images 0. We have no sub-images, so it is just 0. Once that's done, say OK, make sure it is visible, and just click OK, just like that. So now that we've got our objects, we've got our star field, we've got our 3 sprites, we can go back to the game world, like this, and we can start placing things around the room. So we're going to click here at objects, we're going to click over there, notice it's going to show us what we've got. You can also do it over here to choose. So we're going to make a few of these. I'm going to zoom out a bit so we can see that entire window. Put them randomly around. We're going to make some comets. Notice they're quite big. It's going to scale them depending on whatever we wish. Let's add another man over there. And lastly, we're going to add object window just in the corner. Notice it's a little question mark. It has no sprites, so it shows it like that. And it's just going to draw everything on top, right on top of everything, and make it look like a window into the infinity of space. So some other things you can look here. Here are some a quick guide to what buttons do. Alt is no snap. Shift and Control is to add multiples. So if we had to have a comet and we say Shift Control, it's going to add quite a lot of them. See, like that. We don't want that really. And you can delete underlying. I don't know. There's a whole lot of things you can check that out. Then you've got your alpha and stuff. This is all of these current objects right over there. So that's pretty much it. Now if we select OK, make sure that we've got everything there. We're going to push Control S, save our game. It's always good to save it every now and then. If your computer just explodes or crashes because of all the awesomeness you're creating, at least you'll have a backup of that. So now we've created everything, we can simply click the play button right over here, the green triangle. At the bottom here, we've got our compile form. It's going to show that it's writing all the chunks. Any errors will pop up there briefly. There we go. Just like that. We have our window into space. And that's really all there is to it. All our drag and drop actions have resulted in what we are seeing now. We've got the comet spinning, we've got the banana people doing their animation and spinning, we've got this window drawn on top. Who would have thought that it was a couple of variable changes and a create and a step event? It's simple as that. And that's basically how easy it is to create some sort of game. And while some games that you may have seen that have been created using GameMaker, they may look all complicated, but basically if you had to divide them into their base parts, you'll find that they are, well, in actual fact, rather simple. All it takes is a little imagination, a little problem solving, a little questioning, and you can make anything you could ever wanted to make. Well, you're only limited by your imagination and perhaps your skill set. And if you think you are somehow limited by your skill set, there is a huge community of people, and you can find excellent royalty-free items all over the internet. So basically, you can go absolutely wild and create any game world you can possibly imagine. So I hope you found this tutorial educational and helpful. Please feel free to comment, rate, and subscribe. If you're feeling generous, you can buy me a beer or coffee sometime. Links are in the description. I have many, many, many more tutorials on GameMaker. There are probably about over 50 at the time of this recording. I urge you to go check them out, learn something new. Each one features either a concept or a piece of the GameMaker engine. And like I said, you put all those little pieces together and you'll have something awesome. So check those out. And I hope I've intrigued or sparked some sort of interest within yourself. You can find the digital download right in the description. There's the link there, as well as other links to my Facebook page, for instance, where you can get all sorts of daily updates on what I'm working on and what I will be releasing next. So, once again, thanks for watching. I look forward to seeing your comments and suggestions in the description as well as on my comment discussion. Get engaged in this channel. There's going to be all kinds of wonderful things happening as we expand and grow. So, as always, happy coding and thanks for watching. I'll see you guys next time for another great gaming tutorial.